So we are now recording. Thanks everyone for joining us for the 2026 Florida Society for Ethical Ecotourism webinar series. This program is presented by Florida Sea Grant agents. We also have other subject matter experts from FWC, UF faculty, and more. These webinars will be every third Wednesday of the month between 7 to 8 p.m. from June to November. We have a list of previous recorded webinars from 2024 and the 2025 EcoTour webinar series that you can see on the Florida Sea Grant YouTube page. And going forward, there will be on the Florida Society Ethical Ecotourism YouTube page. We ask everybody to please take our evaluation that will be in a QR code and a link at the end of this program. And if you are watching a recording of this program, it'll be into the video description. So look below. We ask folks to go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and we will stay as long as we have questions coming in. So don't, unmute yourself or anything. Just put it in the chat. We'll get to them, and I'll be here as long as questions keep on coming in. And without that, we'll go and continue on. So before we get into the program, just want to give a quick shout out to the Florida Society of Ethical Ecotourism. This group was established in 1998 to maintain professional code of ecotourism ethics in order to encourage awareness and stewardship for Florida's natural heritage. So, everybody's using our Florida natural resources. It's one of our biggest draws for coming into our state and experiencing our environment and our wildlife. So it's up to everybody to be great stewards of those kind of resources to make sure that's not stressed out, other folks can enjoy them. And if you are part of Florida Sea as an eco tour provider, you are, sort of having that promise to adhering to those great standards and best practices that the group promotes. And if you are somebody looking to hire an ecotourism, kind of sort of outing, go ahead and look at our certified providers and make sure if you hire one of those, you're sure that you're sort of going out, the person that you're picking has gone out of their way to make sure that they are adhering to those good stewardship practices. And there's plenty of educational opportunities like this one today. Last weekend, they actually had their annual meeting in the Charlotte County area. So good ways to get involved, connect with local ecotour providers, and get something out of it. So, the other half of this webinar series is our partnership with Florida Sea Grant, which I myself as a Florida Sea Grant agent. Kate Rose, who's also into the webinar today, she's moderating. She's the Charlotte County Sea Grant agent, and we have another arm, Carolyn Kovacs, who's a Flagler and Volusia County Sea Grant agent. So, Florida Sea Grant is a group that is housed by the land grant university system here in our state, which is the University of Florida. We provide subject matter expertise and educational opportunities for coastal stakeholders and businesses, enhancing economic impacts of those businesses that rely on natural resources on the coast, from commercial fishermen, ecotour providers, practitioners for living shorelines, and more. So there was about 20 of us, like I mentioned, scattered throughout the coastal counties. So if you want to know where your local Sea Grant agent is, go to floridaseagrant.org and look at the directory. So, without further ado, we're going to go into the main meat of it. This presentation is Marine Things That Sting. I'm Michael Sipos, like I mentioned, the Florida Sea Grant agent in Collier County. I initially made this presentation for a wildlife interaction workshop that we worked with for Rookery Bay to uphold. And that flag that you see, that lifeguard holding up, is the marine hazard flag out there. So if you see that flag flying around, oftentimes they don't have those indicators like the stingray or the jellyfish. Be sure to take a little bit more caution when entering the water because they're flying it for a reason. Other flags might be a green flag that's good to go, a yellow flag, watch out for rip currents, red, don't enter the water. So be familiar with the flag systems and that Moat Marine visit beaches. And if you see beaches out there that are flying the flags, pay attention to what's out there. So the objectives of this talk is to learn about the science of stings. What is a sting? What's the difference between venom or poison? Identify common stingers of Florida. On the front half, we're going to learn about prevention and first aid because that's, while you guys have while I have your attention, I want that to sink in the most. The role of stinging organisms in our ecosystems. There's sort of bigger groups that we're going to talk about, whether it's a stinging fish or if it's, a sea urchin out there, and then learn some fun facts along the way. So right there is a red lionfish. That is one of our marine invasive venomous fish out there, and something that a lot of folks are aware of. But everybody listening to this presentation right now is completely safe from pretty much everything I'm talking about today. So this is knowledge that you should keep in your back pocket for, when you're interacting with the water, happen to see one of these organisms or, are unfortunate enough to be affected by one. Good information to have. So the science of a sting. What is a sting? So a sting is a structure of an animal used to inject venom or an irritant. So, you could think of like a venomous snake, it has these hypodermic fangs that are ejecting a venom. But people might say poisonous snake. But if you actually eat that snake, you're not going to get those negative repercussions of that venom passing through, that some sort of barrier. Usually it's skin. Poison is something that is sort of has to get ingested or goes through instead of like actually penetrates or causes some sort of, that structure to go through. Plants can also sting, but it's usually just irritating at like a localized portion. It's not so much, a systemic kind of reaction throughout your whole body. Some of these organisms could do that. Some of these organisms can just, create that sort of localized kind of swelling. A sting can be either offense or defense. Why do things sting? Well, they might be stationary critters, and stinging can be them capturing food out there. They might be weak swimmers, so in order for them to not get predated upon, they have these these venoms, or they could have poisons. Like if you think of like a toad, it's not like a very fast kind of organism, so it has those poison glands, but that has to be ingested, not going through that structure of like a stinger or teeth or barbs out there. Or they could be mobile, like a jellyfish just sort of floating in the current, not a really strong swimmer, but it's using those sort of stinging cells to actually capture food. Maybe not necessarily for defense, but it could be a defense as well. So sort of multi kind of faceted reasons why things sting, but we'll talk about, the reason why that certain group does when we get to them. So there's different mechanisms. There's nematocysts, and you might see that more common in cnidarians. And there's different groups of cnidarians. Cnidaria is a big phyla. We have siphonophores that will be like your Portuguese man o' wars and those colonial kind of stinging organisms that aren't actually true jellyfish. There's jellyfish, which are more cnidarians, more related to corals, and those siphonophores because it's just one singular organism rather than that colony. There's venomous fish spines. We just saw the lionfish, but there's barbfish. There's other kind of fish out there, and we'll talk about those. There's penetrating bristles and spicules. This might be more of that localized kind of pain rather than some sort of venom that's injected and going throughout you. So this might be like an urchin that, mainly the main kind of negative effect is that actual particle getting lodged into you. They might have a mild kind of venom to them compared to some other ones we'll talk about, but it hurts when you get stabbed with little pencil leads essentially. And then it could be a contact irritant combo. So think of if you get scraped on fire coral, you might have the actual scrape itself plus what kind of neurotoxin those little nematocysts are actually injecting into you. So these toxins can be, highly specific, affecting nerve signals, muscle function, or blood chemistry. Going back to snake stuff, because I'm a big herpetology kind of guy. There's hemotoxins that might be affecting your blood and coagulation, causing clots. There might be neurotoxins affecting sodium, potassium kind of channels, affecting nerve function. There might be, some sort of venom that's affecting just localized kind of swelling. And then there might be combinations of all those in a specific kind of cocktail too. Oop. Okay. So treatment. So we want to learn about this on the front end while I have your attention. So, you know what to do before you fall asleep on the other kind of slides. But it's really interesting stuff out here. So, main thing, I'll mention which one is more applicable to other kind of groups, but remove the stinging parts. That is a good indicator of what you should do first, if you can. So you might have heard folks like, oh, if you have a jellyfish on you, get somebody to pee on it. That doesn't really work. You don't want to go directly to the rinse off shower as well at the beach because the osmotic changes, the sort of water chemistry between salt water and fresh water can actually cause these cnidocytes that have these nematocysts in them. A cnidocyte is that specialized cell that has the venom. The nematocysts are those little harpoons that you might have seen diagrams, shoot out and inject whatever kind of toxin. Oftentimes it might be a neurotoxin into that critter that's either, trying to say, hey, get away, or maybe I'm going to try to eat you, depending on the organism. These are going to be your jellyfish, your siphonophores, like the Portuguese man o' war, maybe some sort of anemone or coral even can do that. So if you have, let's say, a jellyfish tentacle, get the stinging parts off you. Mechanically removing the structures is good. Once again, like a snake kind of analogy, if you get bit by a venomous snake, are you going to just keep on grabbing it with that hand, keep on getting bit? No, you want to, use a tool to effectively remove those stinging structures to prevent any additional stings. Because if you touch it, you might get stung again, right? So this tentacle. And then, you have to, timing is all that matters really with either using vinegar or salt water to sort of rinse off that tentacle or any kind of other parts that are left on you. So if it's an hour after you get out of the water, if you put vinegar on it, it's not going to help you, So this vinegar is meant to change the pH and sort of denature that the stinging cell. So think of, putting fish into lime juice like ceviche. It turns from a clear kind of portion of a fillet to that white kind of cooked kind of thing. And that's the same sort of aspect of vinegar. Using salt water to rinse, that's not necessarily neutralizing it, but it's better than using that fresh water that could actually cause those stinging cells to rupture and fire into you some more. So if you're going to try to rinse off, use salt water. If you have vinegar, that's best. If you are at home already and the tentacles are off you, the vinegar is not going to do anything like I mentioned. For other kind of stings, if you have like a catfish sting or a stingray sting, using as hot of water as you can stand. Usually that's about that 110, 113 degrees. You don't want any hotter than that because then you can start sort of damaging your skin itself. That can help denature those venoms. So think of, the pH difference in vinegar is cooking it while the heat is actually cooking it like an egg white in a pan, right? Sort of once it starts changing its form, the venom isn't really reacting as much anymore. Avoid fresh water, like I mentioned, and rubbing if you have those jellyfish kind of stingers, because you're just rubbing it more into you. You definitely want to clean and treat the wounds. You want to watch for infection. This is very something that you want to make sure to watch for, even more so if you have that actual portion of the stinger inside you, whether it's a barb or if it's spicules of like a bristle worm or some spines of a sea urchin. You want to get those out of you because that could cause infection. And in some cases, if there are, sort of um, barbed spines, you might have to seek medical attention to get those surgically sort of removed out of you because it's really hard to pull out. At some point, it might just be some sort of skin rash, and you can use hydrocortisone creams for itching, and then different kind of ointments to prevent any sort of kind of eczema kind of reaction that you might have if it's a surface kind of level sting like a jellyfish. And like I mentioned, pee or ammonia doesn't really work because those are pH neutral-ish. So if it'd be, a different change in pH, it might cause that osmotic pressure to change and cause them to fire into you. So use salt water to rinse off stinging stuff in salt water. Use vinegar if you have those tentacles on you. That's the best. But don't pee on it. Don't put ammonia. Don't put fresh water on it. immediately after that sting. So symptoms and what you need to do to get help. So it could vary from, if you have a weaker kind of jellyfish species that we'll go over from just dry, scaly skin, maybe an immediate pain from the actual interaction with that organism, to, nausea, elevated heart rate, vomiting, dizziness. Everybody's internal physiology and morphology is a little bit different. So if you're prone to swelling up or having some sort of reaction to, a land-based sting, that might be a good indicator of you getting, help quickly. There's definitely hotlines that can help you out, like the Poison Control Center. Like I mentioned, these things are more venoms than poisons, but if you go on their website, which I'll send everybody a good link of resources after this presentation, the Poison Control Center actually has, a page for lionfish stings and jellyfish stings and stingray stings out there. Your physiology can really dictate whether you need to get help immediately as well. Age, weight, condition. If you have some sort of pre-existing condition, this could exacerbate that a little bit more. I've read one time about if you get stung by a scorpion, if you're under the age of 6 or over the age of 60, it's a good idea to actually, seek medical help without, trying to take care of it at home. So if you're of older age or younger age, that dose might be a little bit more greater in terms of impact on you. Location of the sting can definitely change whether you're going to seek help immediately or the severity of the sting. Some things might not be able to penetrate, your rougher skin of your hands. While if you get that same hydroid all over the bottom side of your arm, that's very thinner skin, and it might, affect you at a greater rate. So, if you have a jellyfish cover your whole chest rather than just your hands, it would definitely affect you more so. When you get stung, note the time of the sting. You want to make sure that you have that for your own personal information, just to know, hey, how long has it since I've been stung? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? That information might be really good to tell the doctor if you're talking to a doctor or even these hotlines out there. I mentioned poison control. The Divers Alert Network is also a very good resource. They have plenty of online materials. Dan is actually sort of a supplemental insurance company and also an education company. They have a book out there online that's an ebook that goes over, sort of mechanisms of stings. I used a lot of the information in this presentation, and a great resource for, any kind of diving related incident. They have a hotline with dive related medics, and they're very more, sort of into that marine kind of problems that you can be having rather than, you might get a person who might not even have heard of that organism before at, emergency room, interior of the state or something. So when do you want to get help? Like I mentioned, if you're prone to allergic reactions to stinging things, if you're having severe pain, if note the time of the sting and it's only getting worse. If you're having trouble breathing, that's definitely something to get looked at. If there is an infection, like I mentioned, some of these might actually be like a physical spear that gets into you, like a fish spine. So if you can't remove that, that is a very good mechanism of getting infected. So that's a good time to go look for medical help if you can't remove that from you. Like I mentioned, I'm not a doctor. There's hotlines out there that could suggest if you need to go see immediate medical attention and, sort of be aware of yourself, know how you handle these kind of things and if you need to, seek a doctor right away. But let's go into some of those stinging organisms out there. So catfishes. When I did this presentation for Rookery Bay, I try to, focus on something that people would see more often. And catfish are definitely prevalent in our estuarine environment out here. There's plenty of freshwater catfish varieties as well. There's over 29,000 species of fish. About 6,000 species of those are catfish. There's freshwater marine ones. Freshwater ones I think, are actually cooler in terms of the diversity of them. If you think of everything that lives in the Amazon or the Mekong River or stuff that lives in coffee, right? A lot of those freshwater catfish, they also have, venomous dorsal and pectoral spines, and there'll be a better picture of them. But some of those fish might be in contact more with like the bottom and different kind of environments. So these might be a little bit more gnarled up and less sharp, while these saltwater catfish, the hardhead catfish and the gaff top ones, They're pretty moving. They move around a lot. They don't really dig into burrows, so they're sharp and pointy, and they'll get you. Their mostly for defense. That I don't think there's any sort of offensive capability of these spines. Like a fish isn't swimming up to another fish and jabbing them. The stinging structures are just this dorsal spine and these pectoral spines. I've heard of folks be very concerned with the barbels over here, these whiskers, and those can't sting you at all. Those are just mechanical receptors to feel around in their muddy environment, and they actually have taste buds on them. So there's three things that can sting you. One, the other side, two, and then the top dorsal spine. These hardhead catfish are more so in these estuarine environments, but you can still find them in like beach areas around passes and stuff more so. If you're going to catch a catfish on the beach away from a pass, it might be this gaff top sail catfish that gets a lot larger. It's easier to avoid that stingy kind of cell with a larger kind of catfish that they're slimy and not very fun to deal with. So, one of the best things that you could do is using a dehooking tool to remove a hook out of a catfish. Be sure to, use control when you're dehooking them. I've seen people get pliers and just start violently shaking. And at that point, you don't know if it could swing back and hit you in the arm or if it'll drop on your feet. So hold it away, use a slow and controlled movement, and try to use a dehooking tool to prevent you from, getting your hands around there and getting stung from the first place. If you're getting a bunch of catfish, you could switch out spots or switch out baits. If you're using squid on the bottom and it's just catfish after catfish and you're not really familiar with taking them off, you're just increasing your risk of, having that oopsies, which is not a good thing. Don't step on them. These sharp, rigid spines can go through most footwear, and they're barbed, so they won't slide out of you. You'll be connected to the fish, and that thing will start wriggling and hurt even more. The symptoms of these things are intense pain and swelling and nausea. I've seen grown men, want to go see the doctor just for how bad they feel from it. They also have a slime that's sort of like an anticoagulant property as well, so you'll start bleeding a little bit more and swell as well. So this is that hardhead catfish, and you can see those two pectoral fins that have those spines on them, as well as that dorsal, and that's a good way of holding it. Having your finger above that spine sort of immobilizes it from like sliding out of your hand like a bar of soap. You hold it on pretty good, and you can effectively remove the hook. And then this is what a sparb looks like. So it's not going to get out of you very easily if you get it in, especially this far. This is actually, I think, a 2-year-old's foot, so they don't get that big. But that's going to require some sort of surgery to remove because you can see all those little barbs that'll prevent you from pulling it straight out. So next up, stingrays. There's several species of ray that can sting in Florida. There's about 20 species of rays in our state, rays and skates, which look very similar to stingrays, but they're more sort of elongated shape and have a beefier tail. There's pelagic and benthic rays. So pelagic rays, you could think of Mr. Ray, sort of swimming in the water column. They could sit on the bottom as well too, but mostly they're just sort of cruising around slowly. And then the benthic rays that just suck to the bottom, and you can see that sort of piece of shape hidden in the sand a little bit. They are stinging out of defense. Once again, they're not, malicious and trying to get you or hunt their prey down with their stingers. They're not backing up into something slowly and hoping it'll sting it so they can eat it. It's also barbed, so very similar to that catfish that you can see, but more serrated on both sides, while the catfish are sort of more serrated on the other side. These are cleaned. They usually have a skin on it that can, increase your chance of getting infected. And once that skin sort of moves, it stimulates that glandular tissue to start providing more venom and giving you that really bad reaction to it. Um, there's seasonality to them, year round. The stingrays can be in Florida. May through October is your greatest chance of sort of possibly getting a negative reaction and getting stung by them. Mostly because that's sort of calm weather conditions, right? So everybody's going to the beaches. It's nice and warm. It's nice and flat at the beach. If there's a lot of waves coming, there's more turbulence, and those stingrays won't really want to be up on that surf line because they're getting knocked around and stuff. Well, if it's nice and calm, they might hunker down and bury themselves and get hidden. Also, during that same time of year, they're starting to pup. So, one stingray becomes five stingrays, and your chances of getting stung is five times as great. But, if you do the stingray shuffle, you won't do the stingray hop. So, tips for, if you see that purple flag, that might mean hazardous marine life from um, jellyfish to stingrays. Shuffle your feet, tread lightly, and conditions where you are able to sort of float if you step on something, I would do that. Use light feet. I've stepped on a couple stingrays before and they just sort of scoot around you. It's not until you really put a lot of pressure on them that they sort of bend that tail back. It's on the fleshy portion of the tail. They can almost scorpion it and get you. So it really, they don't want to sting you. They just have that as a good defense mechanism. Again, this portion of the tail stings you with that barb. It's not the tip. So a lot of people think all the portion of the tail can sting you. It's just right there. Where would you encounter them? Like I mentioned, beaches, lower salinity estuary environments. We'll talk about some of the different rays that live there, sandy things. Look for them, their depressions and their outlines. Sometimes you could see that shape of a stingray there. You see some eyes out there. If you're fishing, use a dehooking tool. Immobilize the base of the tail first. Even if you're trying to get the hook, their mouth is on the bottom, that tail can still come around and sort of scorpion you and get you. So oftentimes that requires a buddy. Maybe use your pliers to mobilize that portion and try to get the hook out with your hand, or use two sets of pliers holding this and holding that. So be very careful when you're dehooking a stingray. I've seen horror stories. And this is why they have that barb. So this was somebody who was cleaning up a hammerhead shark jaw, and as they're taking the meat off the jaw of the actual cartilage, you could see all these barbs stuck in there, and I'm sure there's a plenty more there of that's one of their favorite foods to eat. Yeah. So these are four commonish species of stingray, definitely three very common ones. Bullnose ray, not really sure why I put that in there. That's a pelagic species of ray. We also have the spotted eagle ray and the cownose ray that are way more common than the bullnose ray. Long story short, these are pretty rigid. Pelagic, they're swimming, you're rigid to reduce any sort of friction loss on you. They can't really bend their back like this thing can just scorpion on itself. It's pretty rigid over here. So you'd have to really lay on them. So a lot of people think they don't really sting at all. They do have stingers, but it would be very hard for them to sting you because they're constantly sort of pulsing and moving in the environment. The ones that don't have stingers, I think I mentioned, was the manta ray and the devil ray, which are those pelagic sort of filter feeding rays. The devil ray has a little stinger. It's not really functional. I believe the manta ray doesn't have a stinger at all. But that would be pretty wild if you were in the position to get stung by a manta ray to begin with. The most common ray you'll see on the beaches would be your southern stingray. They get about 4 to 5 feet and about 200 pounds. That sounds huge, and they do get really huge. If you see the pictures of the people in the Cayman Islands and Stingray City and the big plates out there, those are going to be your southern stingrays. But things aren't born that size; they're born smaller. So, if you're on the beach, southern stingray probably your most common ray you'll run into. Next most common one you'll run into is probably the Atlantic stingray. These ones are living in more of that estuarine and even freshwater environments. There's a lake called Lake George in sort of central Florida that has about 3 parts per 1,000, which is about a salinity, which is about 1/10 of regular seawater, and there's stingrays in that lake. So if you're, in the back bays, around a river mouth or something, you'll probably run more into the Atlantic stingray. That's much smaller than the southern stingray. although southern stingrays do grow to that size. They might be Atlantic stingray size at one point. And then sort of the intermediate one is the blunt nose ray, and intermediate in both terms of size and sort of position in the ecosystem. So neither fresh nor estuarine completely, neither open ocean that you can see maybe some of these southern rays even offshore, sort of, passes and stuff. Bullnose ray, less common. Eagle ray, spotted eagle ray, cow nose ray, more common. Pelagic, so you're not going to really be hopping on that magic carpet. There's also a yellow stingray that you could see around reefs and wrecks and stuff. They're more of that seagrass kind of species. There's a rough tail ray that can get up to 8 feet long and weigh up to 600 pounds, and that's a very far offshore species. Once again, there's about 20 species of stingray in Florida, 20 species of stingrays in skates. But probably about 90% of the ones that you'd see and interact with would be these three species, more so these two. Okay, so one of my favorite families of fish, the Scorpionidae family. So it's a very diverse group of fish or family of fish. Anything that ends with an IDAE, if you see a suffix, is a family. If you're talking about phylogeny and everything, there's about 300 species of fish in the Scorpionidae family. So think of sea robins. You might have seen them with their like little modified pelvic fins crawling around with their big pectoral fins that look like wings. There's rockfish. So if you're from the Pacific Northwest and you're fishing for, orange roughy and stuff, those are in the Scorpionidae family. Sculpins, sticklebacks. So it's not just, the lionfish and the barbfish out there. But in Florida, the ones that you have to watch out for would be the red lionfish, which is an invasive species introduced by the Indo-Pacific. They have 18 venomous spines, which are just your dorsal spines, three anal spines, and two pelvic spines, right? So these dorsal fins over here, they actually don't have spines at all. It's just this one, that one, and then right underneath these dorsal fins. Those are more of the reef kind of species. You won't really see them in the estuary. If you're on the west coast of Florida, you have to be, further offshore where these salinities are stable. If you're on the east coast of Florida, I've seen them underneath docks at like Boca Raton area. Next up, you'd see your barbfish. These are not as big; they're pretty small. I mean, they get larger. I've only seen sort of smaller kind of species. Like you could see the actual spines itself are a lot more stockier and more robust out there. And then there's the spotted scorpion fish that you'd see more so on like reefs. And I'll show you a good picture of them. If you're like lobster diving on the East Coast, you'll see them. Once again, not super elongated spines, really stocky ones. And these two are very camouflaged, so your risk is not seeing them and potentially stepping on them. Lionfish, you'd probably get stung if you're actually trying to manipulate and interact with that fish, whether you're fishing and you accidentally catch one, or if you're spear fishing and you get poked by it. So these are definitely for defense. All three of these fish aren't stabbing something with their spines and then trying to eat it. These two are the sit and put, and then this one is more of that aposematism, which is using color as like an indicator of, hey, don't mess with me. Seasonality year round, it varies, where you would encounter these, maybe estuary, reef, definitely reef. But mostly on these rocky kind of structured habitats and these stable salinities. They have these smooth, grooved, venomous dorsal, pelvic, and anal spines. So, like I mentioned, these pectoral fins, it looks like they don't have them. Definitely not in the lionfish. But yeah. The symptoms are intense pain and swelling. I've gotten stung by a lionfish a couple times, and I could tell you it just depends on the where you get stung to, whether it's in your hand, if it's in your foot. That was one of my most painful ones because your foot doesn't really have a lot of area to swell, so it feels like your skin's about to rip. I've also gotten hit in the shoulder, and it just sort of made it like a bee sting, a little bit puffy. But everybody's internal chemistry is a little bit different. So if you're prone to blowing up with stings, I'd seek medical attention or some sort of treatment. The treatment for it, it's not, you're not going to pour vinegar on it because it's actually injected into you. It's going to be remove the spine if it's broken, probably more of a chance of these breaking because they're longer and they're sort of skinnier like a toothpick. And then hot water immersion as hot as you can stand at like 110, 113 degrees to denature. Remember, we're making this venom from like egg white to a cooked egg white, white, so that clear kind of thing. Um, you know, Tips is just avoid handling to begin with if you don't have to, if you don't have that training. If you fold the fins back, if you don't get stabbed with a normal fish, you won't get stabbed by a lionfish any more so. It's just higher stakes. And then, if you're interacting with a lionfish, if you have a pair of pliers, if you have it in a zookeeper, maybe cut the spines off with a pair of scissors before, dropping in a cooler or, making it, manipulating it more on the boat. And yeah, and I'll show you some more. That's a picture of that spotted scorpion fish that we have over here. It's very well blended in. You can see he's actually eating something there. But I've seen them on reefs where, you put your hand on a rock and all of a sudden that rock starts moving around and you think, oh, that's a close one. And then this is how the actual envenomation sort of happens. Same thing with the stingray, same thing or similar thing with the stingray, similar thing with the catfish. You have this sheath, which is that, skin tissue on the spine. It gets pushed down, the glandular venom gland sort of releases the venom through this gland. And you can see it traveling through these grooved sheaths. So if you see a lionfish spine. It has grooves in it. And once again, the dorsal, the pelvic, and anal fins have the spines that are venomous. The pectoral fins, which are, you can imagine a fish's arms, they don't have it. And yeah, so if this guy got stung, the severity of his sting it vary because all these the glandular the sheath tissue's off. So who knows if these actually envenomated him or that one did because it pushed it down more. If the fish is alive or dead, how many spines you have, all really depends in location of your reaction. Doesn't feel good, could last for hours. Use hot water if you have it available to sort of try to neutralize that pain. Honorable mention for fish that sting, the skipjack or the leatherjack. This is a fish that is burned into my brain because I would cast that bait as a kid. You're in a rush to put all the baits in a bucket, and all of a sudden you get one of the worst pains you felt in a while in your hand. And that'll probably be the skipjack. So they look like a little bait fish. They're in the middle of a little bait fish. You would catch them if you're mackerel fishing off the beach, but they have these venomous dorsal spines and pelvic spines or anal spines right here, and they hurt. So, you'll learn the first time you get stung by one, sort of localized pain that it really hurts at that spot, probably dulls out within like an hour or so. But look at the fish you're picking up before you just pick it up, or if you're using a spoon and looking for mackerel and the mackerel don't have any lines on it, might be a skipjack and be careful. So jellyfish, these are, what people really associate with stings on the beach a lot. I've heard a lot of jellyfish stories as a Sea Grant agent over the years. I've experienced them in different kind of ways as well. Jellyfish, everything else that we talked about was for defense. It wasn't for predation or offense at because they're stuck structures on them. It wasn't like a bite kind of thing. It was spines. So jellyfish are doing this for offense and predation. They don't really move that fast, so if they're sort of filter feeding stuff out of the water, plankton mostly, but maybe they'll eat a fish if it comes in contact with their stingers and are able to get through the fish's slime coat. There's some fish that are sort of immune to them and you could live in the jellyfish. Think of like a clownfish and an anemone, which is like a stationary jellyfish actually. These are cnidarians. They're related to coral. They have a really cool life cycle where they're, little larvae. They settle, they become a polyp. That polyp just starts shooting off jellyfish, and they turn into that Medusa stage that we're actually familiar with, just floating around in the water column. There's a seasonality with them, with more of warmer months being, when you would see more of them probably, because like I mentioned, they are filter feeders. So they're eating, plankton blooms out there. This time of year, actually, we had a number of whale sharks off our coast here in Collier County and Lee County. And the whale shark biologists think they're in our area because of fish eggs that are getting spawned right now. So the jellyfish might be eating those as well. So they have the opportunity to create big numbers really fast. They could be anywhere from the back bays, if you're, looking at the upside down jellyfish, to the beach, to the open ocean. They sting with nematocysts, which are those specialized venoming and venomation cells, right? So this is a cnidocyte, actually. That's the envenomation cell thing. The nematocyst is the actual curled harpoon in here that shoots out and sort of hooks onto the organism it's trying to eat, prevents it from going away like a harpoon actually functions. And that trigger is that nitosil. And these are the ones that if you get stung by them, what are you supposed to do? Don't pee on it. Don't put fresh water on it. Try to get the stinging parts off you using tools, not your hand, because you don't want to sting yourself more or rub more stingers into you. If you have vinegar, use that. That's your best chance of denaturing these cells to prevent that from triggering and firing. And if you have salt water, use that instead of fresh water, because that osmotic shock of the fresh water might cause this to explode and just shoot out into you. So really big tips are, look for these beach flags. There's websites like visitbeaches.com that Mote Marine puts out. That is a great resource for looking if these flags are present. It's really good for red tide conditions as well. Other tips can be keep your skin covered. If you're in areas where jellyfish or other kind of stinging cells are present, we'll talk about some more, even more stinging things after this. Wearing a shirt, rash guard, wetsuit definitely helps. They can't penetrate that through that. Tentacle length can vary, but can split apart. Now, I'm not sure how I put that. Use tools to take off tentacles. If they're, still on you after that sting. Like I mentioned, vinegar won't help you hours after the sting. It's really as you have that tentacle still on you. And yeah, jellyfish are some of my favorite kind of organisms because they have a really cool life cycle. But we'll talk about some common ones here. Oh, so they can be a problem. As you can see, a headline: more than 800 people were stung by jellyfish in Florida in 3 days. So that could have been that big bloom that might have occurred with, phytoplankton or zooplankton bloom out there. More food, currents can affect them. They're not really swimming too great. The box jellies can sort of pulsate, but they're not traveling miles that way. They're, basically plankton themselves floating around in ocean currents. Okay, so these are, more common jellyfish that you might see over here. There's the moon jellyfish. These are, large kind of dinner plate ones. The stingers, the tentacles of them are pretty short. They're inches long, not feet long. So if you're 5 feet away from them, you're okay. The stingy parts are these. The actual like shower cap portion can't sting you. So if you have to push one away that way, I'll just swim away. But if you had to, touch the top of it, not this part. Um, they get about 8 to 10 inches. Like I mentioned, different parts of you could get affected differently. I knew a guy who was bald and we were scuba diving, and he actually, hit his head on one of these on the way up in the water column, and that, was not very fun for him to react with. If they get like your underarms or your stomach skin, it'll hurt a lot more than if they get your hands and stuff. But yeah, it won't ruin your day. It'll just ruin probably a couple hours for that species. Sea nettles are a little bit more. Could be a little bit more impactful, hurt a little bit more, larger tentacles, so more stinging surface area that you could get in contact with. The length of these tentacles can vary depending if it's in like open water or if you already see it washed up on the beach or near the beach. These things don't have to be alive to sting you. They could be sort of deadish to sting you as long as those tentacles didn't denature already and those nematocysts or those cnidocytes are still active. They could still get you. So you have to make sure it's been dead and dried and whatever before you want to try to even interact with these things. The upside down jellyfish, they have these stinging cells. These will be more estuarine. These are more open water, but like I mentioned, they travel with the water current. So, if it's an incoming tide, if the wind's blowing on the beach, there might be more prevalence of these things. Upside down jellyfish, they could sting you. They're actually photosynthetic too. You'll see them in like tropical kind of areas in the back bays too, stable salinities and like the Keys. Fun fact, one time I actually put one in a monofilament net and I tried to swim really fast and show my buddy it, and the monofilament net just cut it and all the stinging cells went all over my stomach. So, like I mentioned, they could do sexual reproduction, they can do asexual reproduction. If you segment them, they could turn into another one. So I was probably making a lot of jellyfish that way, but they can sting you even if they're dead, as long as those tentacles can still have functional nematocysts in them and cnidocytes. Then cannonball jellyfish, not really common over here, but I thought it was interesting because in Georgia, the third largest commercial fishery in them is cannonball jellyfish that they sell to Asian markets like Japan, China, and Thailand. So this is a cool kind of thing, stinging, but not too big tentacles, so your chances of you getting stung is not that great unless you're physically touching it instead of, oops, I bumped into you. Like the sea nettle that has larger ones. But this is the product that ultimately ends up being. Siphonophores. So these look like jellyfish, but they are not true jellyfish. These are actually a colonial organism made up of zooids, and they're in like that medusa kind of free floating shape. Interesting thing enough with these zooids is they come from like one single fertilized egg, I believe, and all these are genetically identical, but they're morphologically different. There's zooids that are for reproduction and digestion. There's other ones for hunting and catching prey. They have very long tentacles and they just float. If you know what a Portuguese man of war, it's a ship. So they use their pneumatophore, which is a gas-filled kind of sail, to just float around. And I've been stung by these before. I've been stung by a lot of these things. And it hurts. You know exactly when you get stung by them. Same thing with the other jellyfish, but these not true jellyfish, it almost feels like you're getting electrocuted and burned at the same time. And depending on where you get stung, like what environment, depends on how long these tentacles can be. So these tentacles can be 30 feet long up to 165 feet long. So when I got stung, I was in Boca Raton, about 3 or 4 miles offshore, and I got completely covered. And luckily, I was wearing a wetsuit, so it wasn't stinging me around the wetsuit, but it still stung me around my wrists and my neck. And I stood on the back deck of the boat, and my friends were taking off all the tentacles from me with lobster snares and nooses and tickle sticks and stuff. So, use what you have on board instead of your hands so you don't get stung in the hands. They're doing this again for offense and predation more so than defense. If you're going to eat a jellyfish and you're probably going to go after it and you're probably used to eating jellyfish. Where encounter beach open oceans, more of the East Coast. They sometimes wash up on the West Coast here. There's other siphonophores too. If you ever see like those deep water videos of like all the things and little chains that look like frog eggs that are just bouncing around in the water column, those are siphonophores. There's also one that has a sail like this and something called a blue button. A lot of times it'll be that jelly kind of thing or have like this brilliant blue kind of color. They sting with nematocysts similar to jellyfish. So once again, use vinegar or salt water or mechanically remove these stinging cells. It's going to be instant sensation, burning pain, scaly. This is one that, you might want to seek medical attention more so than the other just because of the severity of the sting and the amount of tentacles and the amount of surface area you could get covered with your kind of tentacles is a lot greater than a moon jellyfish or a sea nettle or what have you. That's what a sting looks like even after the fact. You might have that, it evolves from that sting to hurting really bad to sort of like a skin condition that you might have. So hydrocortisone cream afterwards and creams to prevent more scaly skin. And that is a Portuguese man of war. So slow moving stingers. These are ones that, yeah, they're doing it for defense as well. Long spine sea urchin, Dianettum antillarum. You'll find these more on the reef. There's a reef urchin too. There's other species of urchin out there that are not really that pokey. They have pokies, but like you'd have to really like step and press on them to get into you. While these ones are relatively sharp. So if you stepped on that, that would hurt. if you just pick it up with your hand and it's not stuck on something, you could handle it. These guys, it's like getting stabbed with pencil lead, and that's what it looks like. It's almost like getting a small little tattoo. So their skeleton's made out like calcium carbonate, more so like calcite, which is like a crystalline kind of calcium carbonate mixture. They could be mildly toxic. It's sort of localized pain. I haven't seen anybody start having like fever or any sort of systemic reaction from urchins, but I'm sure it can happen. Make sure you check the hole before you're going for lobster so you don't get stabbed in the hand or step on it. And a really big kind of risk is, you have a physical body inside you that's an out foreign object. So you want to make sure you can try to remove those spines if you can, and make sure you're looking at that stung area. To make sure that it's the inflammation's not getting worse, and really monitor it. Note the time, note your reactions, all sorts of stuff. So then there's bristle or fireworms. These guys, if you flip over rocks, if you have an aquarium, you'll see them. They're scavengers out there. They live in reef rubble, underneath structures. They're sort of like more like nocturnal. They do have a mild venom and sort of like a slime that can infect you a little bit more. It burns like fiberglass, and the bristles are made out of calcium, so you could use vinegar to try to deneutralize them. Things that don't move. So fire coral or hydroids. So these are more related to those siphonophores, like the Portuguese manivore, because they're colonial organisms. They're also in the phylum Cnidaria that siphonophores are in, and also corals and anemones and even jellyfish, but there's different kind of classifications of that. They have a calcareous skeleton, some of them, and some of them can be more flexible and have like a chitin kind of skeleton. The big ones that you might be familiar with the calcareous skeleton is that fire coral. If you see a coral, don't touch coral to begin with. You might injure the polyp and just hurt the coral, but if it looks like it's sort of a rusty kind of orange with white tips, make sure you don't touch it even more so, because you're gonna have a bad time. They definitely sting and it hurts, and you know it right away. One thing about these that could be even worse than other kind of stinging organisms is that they could be sharp. These calcareous structures can actually, cut you. And then when you have a cut, those uh, cnidocytes that have nematocysts, which have the harpoons that sting you, hurt even more because you're already removing that layer of protection that is your skin. Like I mentioned, they're colonial, so they have gastropores and dactylopores that have different kind of zooids in them. There's two species of that hard kind of hydroid with fire coral. They're in that Millipora genus. Millipora means thousand pores, I believe. So a lot of little kind of surfaces that can sting you. They can photosynthesize, and some of these will be in these like turbulent reef kind of conditions because they're also using these to eat. So they're stinging stuff in the water column and consuming them. And then the more of that chitin skeleton, the flexible skeleton, would be your like these hydroids. So the stinging bush hydroid will be more so on like a reef and stuff out there. They look like, like almost like a bird's nest of feathers. And then these the ectopleura, the pink-hearted hydroids, there's dozens of species out there, can just be on any structure. So if you ever rubbed up against a dock piling, a buoy that's been floating, a rope that's been floating, and you like touch your back or your underarm or your skin, and you get massive eczema and stuff, that's what's causing it. So those hydroids that have those stinging cells, think of them just like jellyfish, just like the Portuguese man-o-war, but smaller. And then I mentioned anemones because they can sting you too, but you really have to be in bad luck to happen to stumble upon one because they're usually colored and stationary. But once again, if you get stung by these, you could try to use vinegar, don't use fresh water, but oftentimes you won't see the stinging cells because they're so small, they're like little feathers. It just sort of turns into this really bad rash that you could probably treat with some sort of cream afterwards. Ball stingers. So things that look like they could sting. I just want to bring this up because I facilitate the Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch program. So does Kate. So horseshoe crabs, a lot of people think they could sting you with this telson, which is actually just meant to right themselves. So they use it to jackknife themselves if they're flipped over because they like to hang out in that surf zone that's turbulent. Wave energy can tip them over. So, hey, that thing can't sting you. They can't even bite you. They can't even pinch you. They're completely harmless, but one thing is don't lift them up by the telson because that is, that structure to help right them as that muscle to help them. If you damage that muscle, they might not be able to flip themselves over. So hold it like our little volunteer over there by the sides, the prosoma, and you'll be good to go. They are very good for everything. Yeah, everybody in this room has benefited from horseshoe crab because their blood is used to assess the sterility of injectable drugs and other kind of pharmaceuticals. They've been around for 450 million years. So recap. Stinging is, could be it's a unique ecological adaptation for a lot of defense. You saw the fish, it's defense. They're not stinging for offense. The slow moving sessile or the organisms that don't move at all might be using it more for capturing kind of particles to eat. There's more envenomating critters out there. There's sea snakes, kraits. They don't live in the Atlantic. They live in the Pacific. There's octopuses that could have mild venom. There's ones that have bad venom, like the blue ring octopus. There's cone snails out there. So these are just ones that are, it's the tip of the iceberg and stuff that you would really sort of encounter more so here in Florida. There's resources out there. I'll send it to everybody who registered for the webinar, as well as there might be some in the chat as well. It could be pay attention to the flag system, especially for stingrays and jellyfish. It can be seasonal, based on when stingrays decide to pop, when it's nice and warm outside and all the blooms are happening, or even just people wanting to get into the water more increases your interaction with marine life. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So best thing is avoid. If you see that thing that can sting you, just stay away from it. If you happen to catch a catfish or a stingray, have that proper training, sort of go over in your hand, have tools to help you manipulate the animal without injuring you or itself. Have good personal protection device, personal protection equipment. If you're scuba diving in areas that have stinging organisms, or if you've seen a bloom, maybe wearing a rash guard, wetsuit, or shirt can help you. When in doubt, seek medical attention. I'm not a doctor. I don't know your internal physiology. But there is help out there from the Poison Control Center you can call, or the Divers Alert Network that's more specialized for, water and marine kind of related injuries. And there's a nice little guide. Jellyfish hydroids, vinegar, salt water, remove tentacles. Don't use fresh water. You could use hot water for pain because that denatures the venom once it's inside you. If you have the venom inside you, like venomous fish, like lionfish, stingrays, or catfish, you can't pour vinegar on it. It's not going to do anything. It's not pneumaticist. It's going to be that hot water treatment to denature that venom that's inside you, clean the wound if you have those particles stuck in you, and seek medical attention if you can't get those particles out. If you're having that allergic reaction, urchin, you have these actual physical objects stuck inside you, want to try to remove them, use hot water if it's actually an irritant to you, because if there's any sort of venom that'll help denature it inside you. Fire coral, similar to the hydroids, jellyfish, and other kind of coral. But with that, I will take any questions out there and I will go ahead and if there might be a link actually in the chat right now for the evaluation. If you have your cell phone, you could actually even scan that QR code and it'll take you to the evaluation page. If you're listening to this online from a recording, check the description and see the evaluation link. And next up will be our webinar on July 15th, which is What's That Smell? Smells of the Coast and the Science Behind Them with Kate. So I'm actually excited to potentially join you guys with that one. And yeah, thanks for listening to me, guys. And with that, I'll actually stop the recording. Do we have any questions in here?